Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Flaskup.com Mr. Pandaria raiding guide. And in this video we're going to be taking a look at the normal mode version of Garrosh Hellscream in the new Siege of Orgrimmar raid. Now in order to complete this fight you're going to want to take 2 tanks, preferably 2 healers due to some kind of DPS pushes that you might want to make, and then the remaining a mixture of both melee and ranged DPS. And it's also worth noting that for phase 1 of this fight, AoE DPS is kind of preferable. Now this fight is split down into 3 different phases with an intermission phase during phase 2. Well, several intermission phases really, I think there's 3 in total. So we'll just take this guide phase by phase and I'll explain the different boss abilities and how you're going to hopefully deal with them, get a shiny title and also get some epic loot. And heirlooms as well, potentially. Now during phase 1 you're only going to have to deal with 2 abilities that Garrosh himself will actually have. His first one is called Desecrate, and this will cause him to throw a desecrated weapon at a random enemy, which will inflict a moderate amount of shadow damage to enemies within 15 yards, and it will create a desecrated weapon at that location. Now this is kind of a massive AoE, it's currently marked on screen with a nice little white arrow. It's kind of a massive AoE ability that you need to not stand in, as it will deal damage to you every second. In order to get rid of this, what you need to do, it's not a massive priority at the very start, but you kind of just want to make sure you've got dots ticking on the weapon, and maybe the odd, you're a mage and you get a pyroblast proc. You just want to kind of throw that at the weapon, because the lower the weapon's health, the lower the AoE is, so it gives you more room to move about the less health it has. You should also note that at our pull we used Bloodlust, Time Warp, Heroism, those kinds of buffs, because it was available for phase 3 of this fight due to the duration of this fight. This might not be the case if you happen to have higher damage than we had, so you need to make that judgment call yourself. Now Garrosh's second ability is called Hellscream's War Song, and this will cause him to inspire his allies, so there's a hint he will spawn a load of adds during this first phase, which will increase their physical damage dealt by 150% and increasing their health by 150%. Now at no point during this phase should the adds be alive long enough for them to gain 2 stacks of this buff. 1's perfectly fine, you can deal with that with your damage, just 2 is pushing it a little bit. Now with the adds, throughout phase 1 you'll get waves of Kor'kron Warbringers and Farseer Wolf Riders spawning. Now the Warbringers are pretty much warriors, and they will cast a hamstring ability on whoever they are currently targeting, so this will be on your tank, and this will inflict 150% of normal damage and reduce their movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds. Now the Wolf Riders, however, are a little bit kind of like shamans, I guess, in a way. They've got a few abilities you have to be aware of. The first one is Ancestral Fury, and interrupting them causes Fury, which will increase cast speed by 25%. The next ability is Ancestral Chain Heal, which will heal friendly targets for a percentage of their maximum health, and this will also chain to nearby friendly targets. And the third ability is Chain Lightning, which will inflict a high amount of nature damage chaining to nearby enemies. Now, it sounds odd, but you don't want to interrupt the Chain Lightning, you want to save your interrupts for the Chain Heal, and this is basically because of the Ancestral Fury buff. If it gets to the point where they're just constantly casting the abilities because you keep on interrupting, then the fight's going to be made a little bit more difficult and harder for you to deal with. So just make sure you're interrupting the heal and not the Chain Lightning. As well as these adds, you'll also get Siege Engineers spawning, and these will enter the room from the side balconies, which is currently marked on screen with yet another nice arrow. And these will begin to power these massive kind of wheels that you can see at the corners of the room, and these are called Iron Stars, and these will become active after 15 seconds if the engineer is not killed. Now the Iron Stars, once activated, will roll across the room and slam into the opposite wall, and when they do this they will deal a massive amount of damage to the entire raid, dependent on how close they are to the Iron Star. So if in the video you are kind of at the same distance as we are, then you don't take that much damage, but if you were to stand right next to it, you can take up to a maximum of 2 million fire damage. So yeah, you need to make sure you're not standing too close to them. As well as this, you also need to make sure that you are not standing in the path of the Iron Star as it does roll, because anyone that gets caught in its path will take a massive amount of damage, and it will also knock them back, but the massive amount of damage will be enough to kill you, so the knockback doesn't really matter. What's good to note is that if you do have useful knockbacks from shamans or druids or any other class with a knockback, you can knock back any adds that are currently alive into the Iron Star, and they additionally will take damage from it. And that's what we did in this video. You might have seen a few adds flying around in the video in the background. We also only killed off one of the 2 siege engineers that spawned, meaning that one of the Iron Stars would always go through. We had one player just stop the DPS on the boss and also on the adds, and then go and kill the engineer in the distance. Now when Garrosh reaches 10% remaining health, he will then enter phase 2 and heal himself back up to full, and this time he comes back with like 420 million health, which means phase 2 is going to be a little bit longer than phase 1. You should also keep an eye on his corruption bar / energy bar during this phase, as this is kind of vital to your raid. Now during this phase he will randomly cast an intermission, and he will teleport you to the realm of Yashar, and you'll have to complete specific tasks within this realm, and you've got a minute to do so, while also making sure that Garrosh's energy level is kept as low as possible. The first one will occur pretty much when you enter phase 2, and then the other ones will occur throughout the rest. Now when you're in the realm of Yashar, you can't actually damage Garrosh until you've killed off all of the little Shah minions that are around. And when you do kill off the Shah minions, they will drop a nice little buff called Consumed Courage for you, or Consumed Faith, or Consumed Hope, and these will grant you a mass damage reduction, and this is needed for when you actually make it to Garrosh after killing all the minions, as he will then begin to cast an ability called Annihilate. Now this will cause him to inflict a massive amount of shadow damage, 3.5 million to be exact, in a frontal cone in front of him. However, he will also deal an additional 360,000 shadow damage to anyone that is within that realm, so that's pretty much every player that's alive. Keeping in mind that this damage is reduced by the buffs that you can gain from killing the Shah minions. And these are little kind of orbs, semicircle things that will spawn on the ground next to the minions or on top of the minions. So when in the realms, you need to make sure that you are grouped up as well as you can, so that everyone is getting this buff. We also split the raid into 2 groups, and used as a general rule of thumb, group 1 would always take the left side of the room, and group 2 would always take the right side of the room. However, I believe it's in the Jade Serpent realm, you're able to just run straight up to Garrosh. You need to pull all of the minions, and then AoE them down, and then go on to Garrosh. The idea is to get to Garrosh as fast as you possibly can, as during this phase he will gain energy from the heart of Yashar, and if you do allow him to gain certain amounts of energy when you're not in the realm during the normal phase 2, he will have different abilities added on to his normal abilities, and we'll take a look at those now. Now during phase 2, Garrosh can cast several different abilities, which can also then become empowered if he does reach certain levels of corruption during this phase, and you should expect him to reach certain levels, just some more often than others. Now his first ability is called Whirling Corruption, and Garrosh will begin whirling around in a circle, which will inflict a moderate amount of shadow damage to nearby enemies every 5 seconds. Now this damage does decrease the further you are away from Garrosh, and this is why we've got in set up how we have Garrosh is in the centre of the room, and we've got 2 markers which are around 30-35 yards away from him. When he begins casting Whirling Corruption, we get all of the melee and the range to stack up on the current marker that the ranged are at, including the tank that is not currently tanking the boss, because the tank that is on the boss, if he moves, the boss moves with him. So you need to keep that tank in place and possibly use a cooldown on him, as he'll be taking more damage as he is the closest to the kind of centre of the corruption. Now, if Garrosh reaches 25 energy, Whirling Corruption will become empowered, and when empowered Whirling Corruption is cast, he will also fire a missile at players, which will inflict a high amount of shadow damage if they get hit, and it also creates a minion of Yashar. So when he reaches 25 energy and it becomes empowered, you can no longer stack up to AoE heal through the Whirling Corruption. This is when we recommend you kind of save your tranquilities for, as you can't really group up to heal, you need healing abilities that can affect players on a more raid-wide spread out basis. Now the minions of your Shah that spawn will cast Empowering Corruption when they're killed, and this will heal nearby minions of your Shah to full and also increase their max health by 200% and their damage dealt by 200%, and this is also a stacking buff. So what you want to do is when you've spread out and the minions have spawned, making sure that you're not standing in the kind of corruption void zones that do appear, you want to make sure that your DPS are just single targeting them off as fast as they can, but making sure they're not killing them near other minions, as they will buff each other. If you think back to Dark Animus and the Anima Golems, it's a little bit like them when they're stacked up, except you need to kill them in order for the buff to spread. Now during phase 2, Garrosh will also cast an ability called Touch of Yashar, and what this will do is mind control certain raid members, and you need to damage these players down to 20% in order to break them out of the mind control. Now where they are mind controlled, they will also try to spread the Touch of Yashar, so they'll also need to be interrupted. This is one of the main reasons we do use the world markers as stacking points, because it did seem to target the ranged more than the melee, and there are more ranged for us, so it was easier just to use kind of knockbacks and whatnot in order to interrupt players when they did become mind controlled. You should also keep in mind that when Garrosh reaches 50 energy, the Touch of Yashar will become empowered. Now this will cause Garrosh to afflict players with empowered Touch of Yashar, which will transform them into a Shah that is immune to loss of control effects and has increased health. Now players with this debuff again will try and spread the Touch of Yashar, so you'll need to bring them down to 20% health as fast as you possibly can. And as you probably also noticed in the background, during this phase, Garrosh will continue to cast his Desecrate ability, which will cause him to throw a weapon at a random enemy, which will, start as a massive void zone and decrease in size as you deal damage to it. Again, this is another reason we have 2 world markers up. All the ranged will stack at 1 world marker, and then when he casts Desecrate, it should go to the ranged and will then move to the other world marker, and then we've kind of got the room to move about. You do need to make sure you are putting dots and random bursts of damage into the weapon so that it is killed off or reduced massively in size before the next Desecrate is cast. Now if Garrosh happens to reach 75 energy, Desecrate will become empowered, and this will cause the weapon to no longer become destroyable. It will become indestructible, and as you deal damage to it, it will regain health over time. So the weapon effectively becomes stationary in place, and you've lost that kind of section of the room for the rest of the fight. You aren't getting that back. That weapon is not dying. And finally, in this phase, your tanks are going to have to deal with an ability called Gripping Despair. Now this is a stacking debuff that will inflict 30,000 shadow damage every second for 10 seconds, and we had our tanks swapping at around 2 to 3 debuffs. But if you see in the video they have like 6 or 7, this is just because they had some taunting issues / vengeance whoring, so pay no attention to that. The lower the debuffs, the better. Now when Garrosh reaches 100 energy, Gripping Despair will become empowered, and this will be causing it to cast Explosive Despair when Gripping Despair expires off its tank. Now Explosive Despair will inflict shadow damage equal to the value of Gripping Despair, and it will also increase damage taken by Explosive Despair by 10% for each stack of Empowered Gripping Despair. So what this means is when the Gripping Despair removes itself from one of the tanks, so when its duration expires, which will be 10 seconds, what it does is it deals damage to your entire raid and also increases the damage that they will then take by further Explosive Despairs by 10% for each stack of Empowered Gripping Despair that tank currently had. So if they had 2 stacks, then the players would take 20% additional damage. If they had 3 stacks, they'd take 30% additional damage, and so on and so on. Now again, when Garrosh reaches 10% remaining health for a second time, might I add, he will absorb the remaining power of Yashar, gain full energy, and heal slightly, and he will also empower all of his abilities. So he'll have the same 4 abilities, but they will be empowered for the final 3rd phase. So he will use Empowered Whirling Corruption, Empowered Touch of Yashar, Empowered Desecrate, and Empowered Gripping Despair. And since I've just mentioned all of those abilities during the phase 2 kind of section of this guide, I'm not going to go over them again. It will seem a little bit pointless. However, I will talk about positioning because I think that is key for this phase. So when Garrosh first enters phase 3, you want to make sure that any weapons that are currently alive are killed off, any minions of Yashar that are up from the Whirling Corruption are killed off, and you pretty much start afresh with the fight. Now, if you use Bloodlust at the start of the fight, it should be off cooldown by now, but if you didn't, this is your time to use it. And what you'll notice in the video is that we all move back from the purple marker to the very back of the room and stay stacked up on a central player, which was me because I'm special, and you need to move and coordinate as a raid for this phase. Now, we move back and stay there until he casts his Empowered Desecrate ability. Now, because we can no longer kill this weapon, we all move to the left hand side, which is behind where the red world marker would be, and stay there, and then we deal with his other abilities such as the Touch of Yashar and the Whirling Corruption that will go off. Then when he casts Empowered Desecrate again, we move forward to where the red world marker would be because we can't move back, we can't kill the weapons off. And then again we deal with the Whirling Corruption, the Touch of Yashar, and any other abilities he's going to throw at us. And then again, when he casts the next Empowered Desecrate, we move to the right, which will be back to where the purple world marker is, and again deal with the abilities. Now, depending on your raid DPS, at this point the boss should be looking to die, but if he doesn't, you just want to rinse and repeat. You'd move forward from the raid marker, and then you'd move to the left again when he casts his Desecrate ability. So all in all, this fight is actually quite fun. Phase 2 can get a little bit repetitive if you are wiping on it, but nevertheless phase 3 and 1 they're exciting. This fight was really good, and it's a good fight to the end of the normal modes for this expansion. We'll just have to see how it does play out on heroic mode. So that's going to do it for this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide. If you would like to view a written version of this guide, then please do head on over to flaskup.com or click on the link in the video description below. Alternatively, if you'd like to go back and view any of our normal mode guides, then please do click on the annotations that are on screen now. As always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Mr. Pandaria or the next expansion's raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel.
Disappoint me, Garrosh. You are not worthy of your father's legacy.
His punishment is not for you alone to decide.
I won't let you take him.
We have all suffered from his atrocities. My people, more than any other. Let him stand trial in Pandaria. There, we will mete out justice for all. The Horde needs its true war chief, now more than ever.
Yes. But it was you that held the Horde together during this madness. It was you that protected our honor. From this day forward, Vol'jin, if you lead, I will follow.
I am not worthy. But I will give my all for the Horde. I will speak to your war chief. speak for the Horde.
Very well. The Horde has committed heinous crimes, Vol'jin. But some among you fought against Garrosh's tyranny. For that, I am willing to end this bloodshed. But know this. If your Horde fails to uphold honor as Garrosh did, we will end you.